Hello everyone. As I said in the previous video, the idea here was to kind of come back to this project and add a configuration file, because of course we can see if we look at, so let's do we can do stack run actually. So stack run -- help will obviously compile and run the project, and so on the surface here, this does not seem to be particularly annoying or whatever. But when we try to execute, for example, migrate, right? We run -- help for migrate. We can see that suddenly we have to fill in a lot of stuff. Also, I actually added secret arn here because when you're dealing with RDS, you may or may not have just a secret to your database. And so we support this now as well. This is completely side feature, not really part of this particular thing. Point though is that you get a lot of stuff, right, that you have to fill in here, and these are not optional. Some of them I guess are, because if we look parse connection info, let's see, the port here is optional. The default is 5432, which kind of makes sense. Yeah, fair enough, right? You could potentially add a default value for user. Maybe it should be Postgres, so that in development, this is kind of beside the point, right? The point here is we have to fill in a bunch of stuff, and it could be very useful to just have a way of sort of sidestepping all of those problems by reading a configuration file. And so how this is going to fit in to everything we're doing is simply here we parse everything, right? And these migrations and everything, like the commands themselves, they require this data. To some degree, we're going to see if we can kind of keep that the same because it's useful, right? This connection info, which by the way is changed because of this RDS and manual and so on. But point being, we're gonna try to maintain this as it is. But before that, we're gonna basically read a configuration file, YAML, and use these values, if they exist, as potential default values. That is sort of my working idea currently. I can't say that 100% will work out, mainly because if the values don't exist, then what would we do with these, kind of, right? Yeah, we're gonna have to kind of semi-explore some of this, right? What we want to accomplish in this is basically when I run stack run and then let's say list migrations, I should be able to, if I have a configuration file present in the current directory that provides everything, I should be able to just run list migrations. That's it. That's what we want to accomplish, and we should do it in more or less a reasonable way. So yeah, let's try to do that. So there are a few things that go into this. There is a YAML module that we want to use. So if we were to, let's say, hang on. If we were to look at this in Google or Stackage, I mean, it doesn't really matter so much. This module really doesn't change that much as far as I know. I mean, it's a fairly static module and package. This is in the YAML package, so it's just a matter of pulling this down. What this relies on is, we can see here, from JSON, right? So this is really effectively this should be usable for anything that has from JSON. So that's really the only thing we need to kind of provide, right? And so, yeah, what I want to do here is read this into some kind of value. Here, by the way, decode throw, decode either. And this is very smartly named, by the way, because decode file either maybe it would be a reasonable thing. Yeah, let's try that. So here we want to read this into some kind of structure, right? The question is, what structure is that, right? The options that we can actually provide for some of these commands and so on are basically, it's the connection info and the migration path and so on, right? And I suppose what we can try to do, they don't really have any examples of YAML files here, right? Yeah, not really. We can kind of experiment with stuff, I suppose. This is the code file either, which returns either parse exception or A, which is fair enough. Let's possibly decode it. Let's just call this maybe decoded options. Config.yaml, yeah. Let's just call this qdb.yaml. I think. Let's look for this file. Ugh, I want a dot before this. Anyway, so we obviously don't have this in our package JSON, so we want to add this here. And now we should see that it's fine, I want to say. Well, it should be at the very least. Oh, ambiguous type variable, yes. Definitely, I mean, it has no idea what we're reading into, so let's just say read configuration file here. I'm gonna define this down here, and we're gonna try to I mean, parse exception, I don't know about that, but let's say string configuration file options is what I'm going to call this. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it's fine. And here we're going to go to types and define this I have no idea why I decided to do stuff like this, but it is what it is. So, what are we doing here? We have a few things. We have this connection info that we could try to read So here we could potentially just say maybe secret arn. Like this. That's one field. And then we could actually kind of take each field from the connect info, to be honest. Because you do want to specify them separately. Host port user. Opa, there's a character there. Port user. This is actually word 16 according to the type. Let's see. Connection info, not what I want, of course. Host port user password database. And I mean, these should be fine as strings, I guess. It shouldn't really be that much of an issue. So these are all maybes, obviously. Hang on. This will not work like this. So here we're also going to add this to the JSON stuff. Oh right, we don't have this here actually. That's interesting. Derive classy lens in JSON. Lens in JSON is basically what we want here. What? It is what we want. It's not basically what we want. So this needs to be generic. We hopefully should be able to do this like this. That's no instance for toJSON secret arn. Now that is annoying, very annoying actually. Let's just do a maybe string on that. I don't like that at all. I'm gonna have to fix that in our library. I'm just gonna go parse exception here actually. And then we don't really have to map left. We basically have other stuff to do. So now what happens when we actually start the program? Probably it should kind of fail. Not really. Read configuration file runs here. What does it actually return? Left invalid YAML. Yeah, okay. YAML file not found. I suppose that's fine. If the file doesn't exist, it doesn't exist, so it's not really a big deal. So the question now is, how do we turn that into something we can kind of pass on here to other things. Because let's say migrations path. We now have a default. Let's say we have that, right? How do we get that default here? Add commands. I would propose we basically say maybe decoded, maybe configuration options, or something like this, right? Add commands now takes this maybe decoded options. And this now basically we would reach into this value and say this is a potential value for this. Actually, is the migration path even in there? It is not, in fact. Configuration file options, migrations path. Maybe file path. Let's say that. Oh no. No, this is not what we, that's not what we want. We want maybe configuration file options like this. Oh, that was... move brackets to avoid, replace with migrate, parse migrations, path. Oh, sure. So here we have, let's see actually what we do have. Parse migrations path now takes an argument, right? So this is a default migration path, which is just a maybe file path. So maybe path here is this value, right? Now basically this should type check. Right, we are parsing this in many places, so we would have to do the same here for these. What is going on here? Hang on. Could match type maybe file path with s to const maybe file path s 61. Oh, of course. So if the error might not seem obvious here, well, probably shouldn't. This is an accessor, right? That accessor takes a configuration options, whatever, and takes out the migration path from it. It's just a getter. This is a lens. When we use this operator here, we are using lenses, right? So that's really what we have there. Oh, actually, this is kind of annoying me a little bit. Decode file throw is actually kind of what I want, and I will explain why. We don't really want the parse exception, and we were kind of just gonna let it be anyway like this. So just to clarify here, right, what it is that I'm doing this for. Now we should be seeing this application crash when it can't find the file. We're gonna fix that, right? Because the file should be optional. File not found. We've crashed, right? That's actually kind of fine. What we're gonna do is we're going to catch this and I'm not sure if this is actually a specific YAML exception, because otherwise I'm a little bit annoyed. YAML exception. Oh no. Well, this is bad. So just to clarify what's bad about this. Yeah, okay. Change of plans, decode file, or decode throw. Yeah, handle configuration file error. Not so bad as a name. So here we're going to catch this. But we're only going to catch IO exceptions. Actually, we could have done catch IO in that case, right? Let's say I do catch IO. Right? We don't really need even a type here in that case. We can just say exception, like this. Now this is going to be an IO error, right? So here I would really just want to return, yeah, well, basically like this says here, default options. We're going to say decoded options there. Configuration options, rather. and we're gonna take the type, this one. I'm just going to paste that here for reasons that will become obvious because of laziness. So this should probably do it. We don't have IO imported. Import system.io feed file. No, actually qualified system IO as IO. Configuration options. Oh, right, this does not read byte string. Oh, hang on. Yeah, that was a mistake here. So in this case, let's look for a function that does this. So file path to byte string. No, not really. Let's see. I think actually there's a byte string module we can just use, to be honest. But I do feel like maybe Rio has something. Actually, maybe not. Oh yeah, it does. We're just gonna do byte string, byte string, byte string, byte string. So byte string. There you go. Here we could just sort of do this and blah blah blah, but I don't know that it's worth it. We can just do this. Parse exception we don't have any use for, of course, because yeah, we are only catching IO errors here, so that's what I'm interested in catching, right? That would mean, for example, this should still pass that, which it does now, right? We can see the default value that we have here is this, right? But if there is a file and it doesn't actually contain stuff, then we should basically, well, actually if there's an empty file, okay, so simple new, yeah, actually that's the wrong directory. Let's add a new file here, qdb.yaml. YAML or, well, YAML, whatever. It is what it is. Now the file exists. Question now is what happens now? It's an exception. Error. Parsing. Actually, what does it expect now? Let's kind of see. Is it expecting migrations path? Test migrations. Of course, we don't need the quotes. It's YAML. And there you go. Right? It just needs the file to not be empty. Which in itself is a little bit weird, maybe, actually. I'm not sure. Does it handle this? I don't think so. Yeah. It doesn't. So you'll basically be doing this kind of JSON thing where everything is just JSON, but you're expressing it in YAML, right? So now we basically want anything that uses a migration path to be able to look into basically, hey, do I have a value? If I don't, then obviously we need one, basically. Parse migrations path. And this gets a maybe file path. Maybe default path. Well, this won't work. The suggested stuff here does not actually work. Maybe default path is maybe file path, right? So that was never going to work. You could, of course, do something like the following from maybe, right? So if you look at the type of from maybe here, some A, maybe A, returns A, right? So first argument is the default. Indeed, you could do this, right? And maybe that is a good idea. Actually, that's not a terrible idea. But for some of these, it's just not going to work out, right? Is kind of the problem. Because certainly we cannot have a default secret ARN. Or a default, well, password you could, just to Postgres for development and so on, right? But some of these you definitely don't want anything like this. Now, if we do add migration -- help. First of all, we can see that we have this in our configuration file, so that's nice. Yeah, this one works out. We're gonna leave this like this. Migrations is gonna be the folder. You can also still specify it via a configuration file, so that's nice. Fair enough, right? It's really with the others that it becomes a little bit more interesting, right? Because they don't have clear default for some of these. Secret ARN really, what would you ever put there? It doesn't really make any sense at all, right? So what I'm thinking about here, just to kind of vocalize this, obviously, because it's tedious to sit here and just look at me looking at stuff, right? What I'm thinking about here is basically what we're gonna do for secret ARN and database, because database also doesn't really have a good default. And obviously we're gonna just kind of do whatever we can if we can't kind of make any reasonable progress here. So let's kind of try to move forward with something, I guess. So we have our secret arm here. By default, this is nothing. So we have a maybe of a string to work with. Connection info is the thing that kind of decides when it comes to stuff like this, right? So connection info is actually gonna effectively use a bunch of these things. Actually, we might say that this actually takes the whole thing. These maybe, or rather, hang on, configuration file options, right? So this takes configuration options. It's very tempting here to be like, oh, well, if configuration options has a secret arn, we're definitely just going to parse arns or whatever, right? The issue with that is it's very hard to override, right? So from that perspective, it becomes very tedious. But you could perhaps say that the opposite. Maybe, where no, actually, if you have default values for these, it's always going to succeed. Well, actually, let's try something, right? So here we can say this, right? Configuration file options, secret arn. If that's a just of some arn, and sure, we are, by the way, obviously going into this kind of we're kind of forcing it to use this arn, secret arn, if we're doing this, right? Which I don't know that I'm so upset about this. Certainly we just have to kind of get going, right? If we do parse secret arn here, and we kind of just say string arn default, or not default, value arn, parse arn. Right, hang on. Let's say this is a maybe arn. And here, from maybe something value arn, maybe arn. Maybe string to mod option field text. Yes, I feel like that's exactly what I wanted, but now it's kind of telling me that's bad. Value is applied to too few arguments. No, I don't believe so. I mean, it's applied to the thing inside here, is it not? What could I put here in that case? Maybe string mode. No. So just to clarify, what I was looking for was, of course, this thing here. If you say from maybe, and then some empty string here, just for simplicity's sake, maybe arn. Hang on, what is a secret arn? Oh, it's a text. Well, that is news to me. No. Okay, fair enough. In that case, we use the maybe function in that case, and here, of course, we can do the same thing. And here we can just do text unpack. Import qualified real text as text. It's fine. Oh no, text pack, of course. Maybe string. There you go. So what I was looking for here, because here we can see value. Value sets the default value for this field so that it's always going to succeed basically to parse this. It's going to use the value on this side as the default value. That's not what we want. We want the value to only be there if we actually have a default value from the config options, right? So this maybe string that comes in here is basically what we want. And what we can do in this case, I think, is we can say basically maybe something for nothing and something for just, maybe arn, right? These two should be able to agree. This should be mod options field text, and I think we should be able to do essentially mempty here. And then here, we should be able to essentially say text pack value. And this line kind of becomes useless now. Just gonna call this options because it's easier, smaller, whatever. Options, configuration file options, secret arn, like this. And now this becomes effectively, it reaches into this. It has a default value. if it's something in the file. Actually, this might actually work out fairly well. I don't know why I'm sounding so surprised, but I suppose we'll see. Yeah. We could actually basically do the same thing here, right? We don't need migrations as a thing here, which that's not necessarily a bad thing to have this, but I do feel like maybe it's just better to have, you know, one of those to have a program that basically, when you're using it and you're wondering about something, hey, what is the default? There's a clear place to go to get that, right? I think that would be useful. In general. Honestly, here, why don't we just take configuration file options? Because it's kind of, I don't know, it becomes a little bit tedious here, right? So this actually already has a default, which I suppose is kind of fine. What we can do here is basically say from maybe localhost, yeah, like this. That should type check, I think. Parse connection info options. Options. Five, four, three, two is still a very good default for this, I think. But we're gonna do from maybe like this, I guess. And here we're doing the maybe empty value thing again. Options. Do we want the from maybe here? I mean, 5432 makes so much sense. Does this one actually need this? I kind of feel like no. Maybe empty value options. Where's the issue here? Oh no, this one needs to go, of course. There you go. I'm actually gonna not run the program, but I'm only gonna options. Let's do this command also. We're gonna output stuff only. So now we're not running anything actually, so we can just kind of pass stuff. Add migration, pass stuff, migration path, out migration path, test migrations. So that's because this is in QDB, right? So if I delete this file, now we no longer have a default. So it should ask for one. And it does. Oh, this is actually, it turned out very beautiful, to be honest. Let's add back that file. QDB YAML. So now we have test migrations here. Let's just say we have a secret ARN. I think it was like this. This is secret. Let's say that. Now if I want to list migrations, this is actually a thing that goes to the database. Now if I remove secret ARN, we definitely should not be able to do anything. Yeah. And I can add host, localhost. And now it doesn't tell me that this is missing. Right, because it's not missing, it's in the configuration. This turned out very well. I'm very pleased with this. And we can just have this like this, and people can still specify stuff. So let's say we did have host, but then I wanted some other host. All right, now we're not parsing. Let's try with secret ARN because I know that one only requires one secret. So when I run here now with list migration secret, we get secrets, right? Let's say I say s other secret. Indeed, we can override just as we want. Yeah. This turned out very well. Now, I'm a little bit curious if we should be, again, trying to, when we parse connection info, I should say, I'm going to move this up as well. So that it's higher up in the file. When we parse this now, I suppose the question here is, do we want? So if I say host here, localhost, it's still going to read RDS. Oh no, actually, hang on. Host, let's, oh no, H, localhost, uppercase H. Oh wow, this kind of just worked with the override. Let's say user Postgres password, Postgres database, Postgres, whatever. Yeah, wow, yep, everything just works. This is beautiful. We're obviously gonna remove some trace shows. We're gonna add back this command here, or rather this function. I'm just gonna all right, so what we've actually added here is basically one. We can use the tool as we would otherwise. Opa. Oh, yeah, I have a database there. So what we've done here is we've added this reading of configuration file, right? This basically informs the parsing of the command lines that we do in add commands here. To say basically, here are some defaults that you can have. And so what we've done to illustrate maybe one of these, what we've done here is that the value function usually specifies a default, right? But if we only specify that default if there's a value inside, right? So if migration's path is set in the configuration file, we are going to be calling value on the value inside there in this maybe, right? Because just to be perfectly clear here, configuration file options contains a bunch of maybes, right? If there is no value inside, we have no default value. So we're going to call empty here. This will make it so that this does not apply. This is an empty action here in terms of this. This monad mod here will have this accounts for nothing. It's like calling no function at all here. That's when we don't have a value, which allows us to have this toggleable default value system. Oh, there's a value in the configuration file. That means we have a default and so on, right? So it basically does a very graceful fallback based on this, on the existence of this in the configuration file. So all right, let's commit this. I suppose we can, maybe we can commit this just because, so that it's visible, I suppose. We've added the YAML module. So just to be clear, what I did there was I added YAML here, right? And this is in whatever stackage snapshot you're using, very likely. You can just sort of add it and it will probably work out. That module is this one, data.yaml. The package is called YAML, like we saw in the package file. The function we're using is decode throw. Takes a byte string and tries to read, tries to read a JSON value from it. The reason we're using decode throw here is because that allows us to sort of just say, well, this file was not readable as this YAML structure, so fix it, right? So we handle an IO error, right? Which means when the file does not exist, we call this handle configuration error. So you can see catch IO here is basically appended. Catch IO catches any IO exception with the handler that you give it here, right? what we do there is basically, well, any IO exception, like for example, we couldn't read the file for whatever reason and so on, we're going to return empty configuration file options. Right? This will be the thing that informs the parser, the command line parser. So in add commands here, we're going to basically not have defaults for many of these because of this. All right, so yeah, decode throw. We're reading the configuration file into a byte string here. We have this configuration options that we read in the beginning that's passed down into add commands. That's how we know that, hey, stuff is being set and so on. Then we have the adding of the commands. And yeah, most of these are fairly self-explanatory. We've looked at a lot of them, of course, like all right. All right. I hope this was interesting enough. If there are any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I guess whenever, wherever, or whatever. And yeah, I should say that the company I work for offers Haskell courses. So if this is something that sounds interesting, I do think that it can be useful, very useful. The courses are done with a kind of very hands-on exercise-based style, and many of the things that it focuses on is basically, let's call it real-world stuff. Honestly, stuff like this, kind of the stuff that comes in when you actually want to produce programs in the real world that do things interestingly with kind of network connections, web servers, HTTP calls, and stuff like this. And also we go into overall kind of application architecture for apps that are, well, bigger than this, for example, long-running apps and stuff like this. So if that sounds interesting, please contact me, and we can kind of, we can maybe start sessions at some point. You can join a group and so on. Anyway, thanks for sticking with me for so long today, and I'll see you some other day. Ciao.